Hey everyone, and welcome to this in-depth explainer. Today, we're doing a massive reality check on India's cybersecurity laws. Look, if you're operating a digital business, handling data, or managing any kind of infrastructure in India today, you are navigating one of the absolute most intense, rapidly evolving regulatory environments on the planet. We're going to go way beyond the surface-level headlines today and really dig in-depth into exactly how India is securing its digital borders. Let's kick things off with a number that is just staggering: 2.94 million. In 2025 alone, that is how many cyber incidents were handled by CERT-In. Now, if you're not familiar, CERT-In is India's National Incident Response Agency, and they get their statutory power under Section 70B of the IT Act. This one single agency is processing literally millions of incidents, making them the absolute epicenter of India's cyber enforcement. But crazy enough, that number is really just the tip of the iceberg, because this builds to an even more alarming figure. Industry estimates show 265 million cyber attacks were recorded against Indian organizations in that exact same year. I mean, just think about the sheer scale of that for a second. This isn't a trickle of threats. It's a relentless, overwhelming flood. And it's exactly this hyper-hostile environment that forced the Indian government to adopt some of the most aggressive and, frankly, controversial cyber regulations we've seen globally in a long time. So to understand how India is responding, here is how we're going to unpack this today. First, we'll look at the threat itself, then do a deep dive into CERT-In's rules, followed by the market exodus it triggered, the sectoral regulatory patchwork, and finally, a really surprising paradox regarding their national strategy. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the threat. So those attack volumes we just talked about, they mean that the compliance rules we're unpacking today aren't just some abstract, theoretical thing. They are a high-stakes, day-to-day reality. When you're facing hundreds of millions of attacks, the legal architecture stops being a dusty rulebook on a shelf and turns into a very active, high-volume enforcement mechanism. Basically, compliance teams are operating in a perpetual state of incident response, testing their compliance against live, hostile actors every single day. Which brings us to Section 2, the CERT-In deep dive.
Okay, this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly strict India actually is. You know how Europe's famous GDPR gives you 72 hours to report a data breach? Well, CERT-In starts a 6-hour ticking clock. 6 hours! And here's the kicker. That clock starts the precise moment you become aware of the incident. Not when you finish your internal forensics, not when you know exactly what happened, the moment you know something is up. This covers about 20 different specified categories, everything from data breaches to DDoS attacks. This 6-hour window is just absolutely brutal for tech teams because you're legally forced to report on mere suspicion.
But it doesn't stop at that 6-hour reporting window. You've got several other massive operational burdens. For one, you have to retain local information and communication technology logs on a 180-day rolling basis, and they absolutely must be stored with an Indian jurisdiction. Also, and this is wild, your server clocks can't just sync to some random global time server. They mandatorily have to sync to India's national time servers. The idea is that investigators can perfectly correlate forensic timelines across different networks during a nationwide attack. And if you fail to comply, interestingly, the penalty under Section 70B7 is relatively modest compared to the immense cost of implementation. It's up to 1 year in prison and/or a fine of up to 1 lakh rupees. Now, here's another huge operational hurdle: the 5-year KYC, or Know Your Customer rule. If you run a data center, a cloud provider, a virtual private server, or a crypto exchange, you have to hold on to validated subscriber names, IP allotments, timestamps, and transaction details for 5 whole years. But check out this super granular detail we highlighted. According to CERT-In's own FAQs, enterprise or corporate VPNs are actually completely exempt from this. It's a massive critical distinction for B2B operations compared to your standard consumer-facing VPNs. And let's look at how fast all of this happened. The timeline for this 2022 rollout was incredibly aggressive. The directions were issued in late April 2022, and boom, they came into hard enforcement just 60 days later in June. They gave a slight extension to September for micro, small, and medium enterprises, but this tight window practically forced the entire tech industry to scramble for compliance overnight. And that leads us directly into Section 3, controversy and market exodus. Because, as you can imagine, the industry pushed back hard on this. Critics, like the Internet Society, pointed out that holding logs for 180 days vastly exceeded the standard 30-day global industry norm. They warned this was totally violating data minimization principles and basically creating a giant centralized honeypot of sensitive data just waiting for hackers. The VPN KYC requirement got so contentious that major international VPN providers literally pulled their physical server infrastructure completely out of India. And what did the government say? The IT ministry was crystal clear. Dilution is not an option. If you don't want to comply, you are entirely free to pack up and leave the country.
Okay, Section 4, the sectoral regulatory patchwork.
So everything we just talked about with CERT-In, that's just the baseline. Depending on your industry, you are juggling multiple watchdogs all at once. Take a look at this table. If you're a bank, you answer to the Reserve Bank of India, meaning you don't just report to CERT-In, you also need a board-approved policy, a dedicated cybersecurity operations center, and you're doing parallel dual reporting to the RBI. Stock exchanges under SEBI need a designated Chief Information Security Officer and mandatory audits. In November 2024, the Department of Telecommunications issued rules that affect even non-telecom entities if they simply use telecom identifiers, like mobile numbers. And in the power sector, the Central Electricity Authority set up their own dedicated incident response team in 2024, with new draft regulations slated for late 2025. Honestly, it's just a massive dual reporting headache. Finally, Section 5, the missing strategy. If you go online right now and do a quick search, you are very likely going to stumble across generic articles claiming that a new National Cybersecurity Strategy 2026 was officially launched. Sounds super authoritative, right? Sounds like exactly the kind of unified document the country needs to tie all these crazy sectoral rules together. But since we're doing an in-depth explainer here, we really need to set the record straight on this. When you compare those random internet claims to truly authoritative sources, the reality is a whole different story. Look at detailed 2025 mappings by the Carnegie Endowment and the Chambers and Partners Practice Guide. They explicitly confirm that the strategy, which was originally conceptualized way back in 2020, is still just an unreleased draft. It was submitted, sure, but there's absolutely zero implementation date set. Those 2026 claims? They're literally just SEO myths floating around with zero government notifications to back them up. It's a great reminder to always check your sources. So, here is the ultimate massive structural paradox you should take away from all this. Based on the absolute best available evidence, India is currently operating its entire cybersecurity regime without a single, comprehensive, formally released national strategy document. Instead, they are trying to secure this massive digital footprint entirely through that fragmented, decentralized, sector-by-sector patchwork we just mapped out. The regulation is advancing piece by piece, instrument by instrument, way faster than any unified national framework the government has managed to put together. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you pondering this high-stakes question as you navigate India's tech landscape. Can a heavily fragmented sector-by-sector patchwork truly secure an entire nation against hundreds of millions of coordinated cyber attacks? It is an absolutely massive regulatory experiment, and it's playing out in real time. Thank you so much for joining me to break this all down today, and definitely keep this framework in the back of your mind the next time you see headlines about global digital compliance.